Does anybody have any comments or something like that about the discussion so far? Yeah.
I think that something that is swept under the rug in a lot of these situations is that failure is an integral part of this pyramid scheme of science.
Failure is an integral part of the pyramid scheme of science.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the way science behaves and how you advance in your career, a large fraction of us will fail, a large fraction of the students will fail, and will eventually find themselves outside the academia.
Okay, so I think what Amir is saying that when we go into graduate school, there's a kind of implicit assumption that success means going to academic, being becoming a professor, and going to industry is a kind of failure, and going to not into industry is like a major failure. And nobody says that, but it's unspoken, and therefore even more insidious. And then people might, for instance, during PhD, recognize science it's not that good for me, but I'll go into the postdoc anyway out of inertia, etc. And it's true that it's only a small fraction of PhDs become professors. So professorship is an alternative career for scientists, for graduate students. But the way I look at it is that in graduate school, you actually get trained with virtues of science, which is knowing how to go into the unknown, knowing yourself as you go into the unknown, truth-telling. It's not, we don't discover the truth. We practice truth-telling. We try to tell the truth when we publish papers. And gift-giving, we don't keep it to ourselves, we publish it. And these values, or of course quantitative thinking, not superstitions, are sorely needed in the world. And if you're passionate about something outside of science, I say that what you learn in graduate school is the best education for 21st century, because all the A, arrow, B tasks have been automated, and what's left are these cloud tasks. And you're experts in the cloud after a PhD. So I think we can reframe graduate education, something much broader. And did I answer your question?
Yeah, but I think you should add to your scheme of the cloud the option of failure, which is there. I'm sure some of your students, didn't get out of the cloud.
Oh yes, I mean, sometimes you stay in the cloud and there's no C, there's no B, and as I say, you die, you're reincarnated. But if you're hopeful, yeah.
I mean, I agree with the statement that graduate education is a valuable experience, but what about like these postdocs that are getting longer and longer as time goes on? Like, when I started graduate school, 2-3 years was standard, now 5-6 is standard, and I see people who are doing 7-8 years of postdocs or 2 postdocs.
Yeah. I agree. So a lot of things about the system of science is becoming, it's more and more difficult for the human organism. And in the end we'll end up in science with only people who can stand it. And that's not necessarily the selection that we want. And a lot of the most sensitive, creative people have something else to do. And so when I think about that, I feel hopeless. The system is so big and I'm so small. Yeah? So what can I do? So the antidote for that, in my opinion, is this discussions of the emotional subjective aspects of science. It will help us discuss what we want science to be like. Because right now, we have, as a profession, there's no forum for us to even talk about what we want science to be like. And therefore, we're at the mercy of economic powers, political powers that determine the systems for us. Because we can't resist. Because we don't talk to each other. How can we form? But most scientists agree about what we want science to be like, and we just don't have the opportunity to talk about it. So if we do, I think about it in a generation time scale where you guys are running science, and we'll have by that time know how to change systems. And so, for instance, it's just like in a democracy. There's a topic that's under the table, a lot of injustice, and then suddenly you start talked about, and it's like a lot of, and then there's some discussion, and there's some legislation, and then it doesn't work, and you read it, and eventually there's hopefully more justice, more good. But it takes a process of discussion first discussion, and we're in the pre-discussion stage. this most advanced part of Western society, science, the flagship, is among the least reflective of its own nature. It's amazing. And that's, of course, radiates down to all of our current culture. The science is so important. So we can make a big change. And I mean, you, by finding out how to change this culture. That's okay. So I want to talk about motivation. I want to talk about intrinsic motivation, which is the feeling that you can't wait to get to work. You were born to do this. Time flows differently. You're feeling very, very curious and you want to innovate. It's the way we want to feel, basically. It's called intrinsic motivation. And again, it's one of those things that seems extremely complex and difficult to describe. But research in psychology in the last, let's say, 40 years demystified this. It's well understood now what it takes to have intrinsic motivation. And I want to tell you about this. It's a kind of diagnostic, very useful thing for scientists to know, as mentors and students. But in order to make it concrete, I'd like to ask you to think about, in your career, in your scientific career, about a day, one day, not a period of time, where you had this intrinsic motivation. You couldn't wait to come to work, or time flowed differently, you were born to do this. So maybe you had a few days like this, but choose one day, one specific day. And maybe if you never felt this in science, something outside of science, some activity or project that you did or something like that, where you had high motivation, a day where you had. Try to think, who was there? What was there? What was going on? What was the situation? What were the factors that you think contributed to this high motivation? Try to remember what it was like. Where were you? What happened during that day? What was it, do you think, that made it such a... And I have to ask you, you don't have to, but you'll enjoy it, to turn to someone sitting next to you or behind you. Spend 3 minutes each telling the other person about that situation, what happened during the day. Don't say the details, like Arginine 157 was 2 degrees rotated. None of that. But what were the factors you think that contributed to this high motivation? Okay, so I'll do 3 minutes and then I'll clap my hands and you switch, okay? And just enjoy it. Going back to the day. So please.